worst nuclear accident in recent history wasn't unexpected. That's according to an internal document recovered from Tokyo Electric Power, also known as TEPCO. TEPCO originally claimed that it had done everything possible to protect the nuclear power plant at Fukushima. But we now know that TEPCO executives had discussed the need to build up coastal defenses back in 2008, 2.5 years before the tsunami hit Fukushima and caused a triple meltdown. The internal document called building up coastal defenses indispensable, their word, to protecting the region from a larger tsunami than had previously been recorded in the region. The company disclosed the document during a lawsuit from TEPCO shareholders who were demanding 55 million yen, about $500,000 in damages from company executives. TEPCO is now claiming that the 2008 tsunami estimate was inconclusive, and if they had built up defenses, even those defenses may not have been adequate to protect against the tsunami that hit the plant in 2011. Simple fact is, TEPCO company officials knew of the danger and failed to take preventative actions. In the Fukushima prefecture of Japan, thyroid cancer rates have jumped by 6,000%. And American nuclear scientists have raised concerns about a spike in thyroid cancer rates along the American West Coast. So the meltdown is far from something in our past, and this new report brings up two important questions. Why did they ignore their own internal warnings? And how is this not criminal negligence on a global scale? Here now to discuss the latest developments with the Fukushima nuclear meltdown is Kevin Camps, radioactive waste watchdog at Beyond Nuclear. Kevin, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom.
So why do you think that executives ignored their own internal advice at TEPCO?
To save money, massive amounts of money, against having to build these seawalls high enough to defend against tsunamis that they knew were possible. And independent investigations by the Japanese parliament, by the Rebuild Japan initiative, found that even before that 2008 incident, that the Japanese nuclear industry had undue influence on determining tsunami protections in Japan. And colleagues of mine like Eileen Miyoko-Smith with Green Action in Kyoto have asked how many people perished in the tsunami from drowning because the nuclear industry pressured Japanese society to lower seawalls to save the nuclear industry money.
You mean
probably thousands?
You mean they were able to influence the government to change the seawall standards for the entire country just to save a little money at those sites where they had nuclear power plants?
That's right. There was a gathering of tsunami experts that the nuclear power industry crashed and pressured into lowering societal seawall heights. And so that's another question, is how many people drowned because of nuclear lobbying.
That's astonishing. Do you know if there's going to be any criminal charges, liability? I mean, this it certainly seems to me like criminal negligence.
Yeah, and I think if I did my math right, that figure for the lawsuit you mentioned is actually $55 billion. And there are other lawsuits across Japan where victims, survivors of the nuclear catastrophe are seeking not only compensation, but also to hold especially Tokyo Electric executives criminally and civilly responsible for this global catastrophe, the worst that Japan has suffered since the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings.
Tell us a little bit about the concerns about increased rates of thyroid cancer in the U.S. West Coast. I've not seen that published. I know that some folks I know who live out there have been taking what's that red seaweed, which is high in iodine, to try to make their thyroids resistant to radioactive iodine. But what do you know about this?
Yes, well, a recent revelation of Nuclear Regulatory Commission internal emails numbering in the hundreds of pages that are heavily redacted still reveal that there was concern at the highest levels of the U.S. government, and rightly so, about the radioactive iodine-131 escaping from Fukushima Daiichi, blowing with global weather and reaching the United States within days due to the atmospheric releases, then falling with rain. I mean, I remember in April of 2011 in Boise, Idaho, measurements by the U.S. federal government of radioactive iodine in rainwater at 242 times safe drinking water act permissible levels. So you better believe we got radioactive iodine-131 in the United States. Likely people ingested it, either breathed it in or drank it in milk or various other ingestion pathways. And it attacks the thyroid gland. It's only around for 80 to 160 days of hazardous persistence because of its short 8-day half-life, but it does a tremendous amount of damage. And these emails that have now been released through FOIA show that U.S. government officials were worried about that, were calling for studies to be done to try to track the health damage. And wouldn't you know, those studies did not happen.
So we just don't know if we're having an epidemic of thyroid cancer on the West Coast in the United States?
The monitoring and the testing and the epidemiology were woefully inadequate to non-existent, and the likes of Dr. John Goffman warned after Chernobyl that protecting the data, protecting the scientific integrity, it's going to be up to the public because the nuclear industry will try to bury the truth. And that sure happened after Fukushima.
And they've succeeded in getting the U.S. government to bury the truth as well. What about any of the states? California, Washington State, Oregon? Are any of the states doing anything?
No, not to my knowledge. I think there's been a huge dereliction of duty at the federal and the state levels.
That's absolutely astonishing. Kevin Camps, thank you so much for being with us tonight, Kevin.